Well, welcome everybody. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce Dr. Angela Booker. She is the provost of the 8th College, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about what 8th College is, I'm sure, today. But it's a brand new college, only its second year at UCSD, and has a whole new vision for higher education. She's also an associate professor in the Department of Communication at UC San Diego, but with a wide variety of backgrounds in both education and informatics and design as well. So, you're going to hear a lot more about her work, but it addresses sort of the barriers of diminishing access to public participation. So Angela's been studying youth voice and participation for a long time, ever since her days actually with Mimi in graduate school.
Graduate school for me.
The what?
I hadn't even started yet.
Oh, you haven't even started. You were an undergraduate. Okay.
No, I was between.
Okay, all right, between. But back in the day when Mimi was a graduate student at Stanford, and has worked with the folks there and sort of the design thinking studios with Shelley Goldman as your mentor, and several of the other folks there as well. And so her work is looking at drawing on participatory design research and other qualitative methods in partnership with community organizers and a really broad variety of community organizers, youth and families as they work to shape their circumstances. And so her analyses attend to sort of the political development, the civic engagement, and uses of digital media and technology. If you're in any of my classes, you're going to be reading from the volume of Power and Privilege in the Learning Sciences, Critical and Social Cultural Theories of Learning. And this is an edited volume that Angela led, as well as Deep Stories of Practicing Teaching and Learning in Anthropology with Digital Storytelling. She has lots of awards, including the career-defining Jan Hawkins Award for her early career work, among many others. So we're very excited to have you. Thank you for sharing your talk today.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for making time to come in today. I'm very excited. It's actually been kind of a minute since I got to give like a real life research talk. So I'm going to ask you for some grace because this is a work in progress. I'm also going to ask you for some help because it has the potential for some real practical implications for what happens, tomorrow when I have work. So, oh wait, do I go to work tomorrow? No, we'll sort of on Monday, unofficially tomorrow. Thank you for that warm introduction as well. I'm always kind of blown away by whoever that person is that gets introduced. It doesn't feel like actually me, but it's exciting for me to try to live up to the opportunities that I've been given. So thank you for this. I have not timed myself, so be brutal with me if I'm wandering on. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to ask for your help with a design research problem. And I'm going to explain it in some detail as we go through here, but I will say by way of background that I was doing some work before I became provost of 8th College that led me to think what would be really helpful is to ask the question, how could you design for the kinds of human relationship and connection that are so central to the work that I'm trying to learn how to do when the numbers go up. So there's a lot of pressure to scale what we do, to have our research lead to discovery and innovation and scale that work. And I was asking the question, my experience was as you try to scale a relationship, you tended to ruin relationship. And so how do we think about that? That was the question. And then the pandemic happened, and then I came back from the pandemic and people said, hey, there's this college, it's going to be community engaged, and it's going to be all about like an education of doing your work together, hand in hand in partnership with communities. I'm like, that's what I do for, roughly 4,000, 4,500 undergraduates in perpetuity. Scale! And also a tremendous problem to try to solve and to sort of understand. I said yes to this gig, and in doing so, I took on something that was launching without a lot of advanced planning. So I started this job in 2023 in February, basically 2 years ago in like a few days, maybe a month. And students had already applied to be admitted to this college and were already deciding whether or not to come to UCSD. And buildings were under construction. Those are real plans. That's not like a B-roll kind of image. That's the image of the buildings. That's kind of all that I could see about it for quite a while before I could get on a hard hat and go in the room and see what's what. So it was a really major project where everything was being made as everyone was preparing to come. Literally, parents were saying, if my child comes here, will they actually have a place to live? And we said, yes. It might not be a college, but they will have a place. So that's how immediate everything was. And on that day that I answered that question in particular, there were 2 people hired for the college. It was April, and there were 2 of us. A couple weeks later, I went to the Senate and got the final approval for us to actually be a real thing and grant degrees. So when I say the cart was before the horse a little bit, the cart was truly before the horse. I try to give this sort of perspective because I knew when I started the role that this was a massive research opportunity, a great opportunity for us to learn something and design something challenging and that might possibly likely fail, but also might possibly be beautiful. But I also knew that the work was so hard that it would be really hard to do the research. And that is totally proven to be true. There's just so much work to get done to make every day happen that it's hard to actually design the study. So what I'm hoping that you'll do is hear the nuances and the sort of ways that I've been trying to think about this, but maybe some of the ways that you might think about similar challenges, and help me think through how we might actually develop a strong participatory design model or another model for researching the college as it's being launched. Fair enough? Any objections? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to start. I was not going to start with the Intro to 8th College, but I feel like it's such a confusing thing that I should start there. I apologize in advance that I will probably give you too much information in some places and not enough in others because I forget what's most pertinent when you're not in a college system. So just, stop me and raise your hand if I say something that is confusing or you're not quite following where I'm going, but I'll try to give a decent overview. And then I'm going to talk about what I think are key concepts, for me at least, in the research, and where I am with those ideas in relation to trying to do it in practice as a model. And then I'm going to talk about some of the ideas I have for the study. That's pretty much it. Okay, off we go. I thought the quickest way to understand the college might be to just get some images going. We have a logo. There's some design elements to that logo that are important to us, but also something that had to happen very quickly. But we were very happy about purple. It was a coup for us a little bit to get that color. All the colleges have a color. A lot of purple in each college. This building that you're looking at is called, it's called Syncopa. That area that's under construction at the bottom is no longer under construction, but nothing's happening there yet. It's a giant market hall that the real estate branch of our campus is managing and bringing in a partner to fill it with public-facing food and beverage and joy, apparently. We're located right across the street from the La Jolla Playhouse, for those of you who are theater people and know the Playhouse. And our campus is trying to basically become a destination location. If you know San Diego at all and you've ever been to someplace like Liberty Station, that's kind of what I think the chancellor has in mind. So 8th College, with its community engaged mission, which I'll talk about in a moment, is central to that goal. But our definition by design of what it means to be publicly engaged and public facing is very different than the campus activation model, which is about bringing people who want to have dinner and hang out. We want to have dinner and hang out too, but our orientation, how that happens, is a little bit distinct. The buildings are named through our very first community engaged process. So the first task I had as a new provost was to go to a meeting about naming the buildings. And we don't actually name the buildings, we propose to the chancellor what the names ought to be. And we were given, gosh, I don't want to oversell it, but I believe we were given roughly 2 months to get that task first thing that the whole committee said, and that I absolutely stood with, was we have to have a community engaged process. If we're going to be a community engaged college, we have to have some way to get feedback from people. That can be a very long process. So the builders who needed the fire marshals to sign off, et cetera, were a little nervous about how that would push out our timeline. But we got permission to do it. People worked together, and we brought together alumni, community partners that many of our faculty work with, including myself. And I should say young alumni and elder alumni who have very different perspectives on the university, community partners within the university, to participate in a process that led to a new theme for the names, which was about recognition of groups that had not previously been recognized and welcomed at university campuses. And the names of the buildings are Podemos, meaning we can, Sankofa, which is kind of go back and get it, where it's looking back to look forward, more sort of situated with our ancestors. Survivance, which comes out of, it's the only name that comes out of academic field, Native American and Indigenous Studies, has to do with survival and thriving and resistance, all rolled into one. There's a whole story behind how we got to that name. And Azad, which is really a strong name representing our Apimeda communities who don't share a single language, but that term, which means to be free, happens to be meaningful in multiple languages. And then finally, Pulse, which was actually the first name that came out of the group's work, which had to do with our shared sense of our heartbeat, right? This sort of notion that we're in this work in an embodied way, but also called on the histories of movement practice that were about connecting through the rhythms and the connections that we have when we don't share language. So some of you might be familiar during the farm workers movement that they used to do the unity clap. So that came up a lot in sort of conversations about how we connect when we don't share culture and heritage and language. So that's the set of names that are sort of like the first thing that spoke about what the college is and what it's for. The reason I spend a little time sharing it is that a fast process, but an in-depth process for us to try to model what does it look like to build from the beginning or close to the beginning with the notion that we make this place together. That we're not making it for people, we're not making it about people, but somehow we're trying to make it together, and we're trying to have processes that will be sustained in that way in our educational model and in the way we do all our programming, et cetera. This picture at the bottom is our first orientation when we had 2 faculty hired to run our writing program. And so David and Nicole, who basically started in, I think their appointments literally came through in the fall quarter, and then they were designing the course and teaching it in the winter. A course that all of our students will have to take, and with a vision toward running the rest of the courses, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then this very exuberant moment over here is just a humble brag. There's a tradition at UC San Diego. It's called the Golden Shoe. All of our undergraduates know about it. No one else knows about it, but it's a big deal, and there are dance competitions and skits, and I can't really explain it, but if you win that trophy right there, and then they engrave your name on it. And in our second year as a college, our college won the Golden Shoe. And so it's residing at 8th College right now, and it's like a huge deal for a lot of people. There's a lot of enthusiasm because students are actually quite excited about this possibility and the mission, but they're also struggling through living in new buildings with like nothing yet quite built, with no processes in place. And so it's kind of the balance between joy and the strain of the work. So that's just a little visual walkthrough. To give you a quick sense of what we've been up to, and to try to explain what a college is, if you're familiar with Oxford or UC Santa Cruz or possibly Hogwarts, a college system basically is a system where students are admitted to both a residential and academically focused experience. That's how it works at UCSD anyway. So every single one of our 33,000 undergrads, when they get admitted to UC San Diego, is admitted to a college. Now, most universities have one set of general education requirements that everyone has to fulfill, and then you get your major requirements fulfilled and you get your degree. We also have a set of general education requirements, except we have 8 because we have 8 colleges. So the college theme drives the focus of the general education courses that count for that particular college. The colleges all also have an academic writing program that has 3 to 5 required courses that only students who are in that college take. Ours is called Critical Community Engagement, and I'll talk about it a little bit as we we go on. So that's like the major structure. And then every college is meant to provide a kind of small university, small liberal arts college experience inside of a huge research one university. So our 33-ish thousand undergraduates are sorted out into these 8 colleges, 8 houses, where we serve 4,000 to 4,500 students with a team of student affairs representatives, so the dean of student affairs and the whole team to support students in both programming, but also when they have challenges, students of concern, conduct, all those things that's all through student affairs. Residential life, which is managing everything that has to do with living in these buildings, and all the RA hiring and management support and all the day-to-day work that goes into programming and supporting students while they live on campus. We have our academic advising program, and they manage all of the things that have to do with everything from time to degree to needing to withdraw from a class to, oh gosh, sorry about that, to working with our colleagues in every department on campus to make sure we're up to speed with what courses still exist and therefore can count for meeting a requirement, all those kinds of things. They negotiate all of that. And they're the people who basically make sure that a person is ready to receive a degree. So the department certifies for your major that you've completed the major requirements, but the college certifies that you've completed all of the requirements for the degree. And so in that sense, we have ultimately in the colleges that are complete and full, they have 9 advisors for their 4,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 students. Okay, did I miss some? Oh, the academic program. Our academic writing program is called Critical Community Engagement. It has 4 courses, 2 of which have run. So CCE 1, Critical Community Engagement 1, is an introduction to our orientation to what it is to do community engaged work. There are a lot of models for community engaged work. You could say from service learning and volunteering kind of structures to more organizing or participatory action models. Ours is more on the participatory action side of things and helping students recognize that while we say the term community, we aren't actually always talking about the same thing. We also have a part of our curriculum that is about sort of reflecting on your own experience and identity in relation to our histories of relationship with one another. So the first course is not a writing course, it's the intro course to what we mean by critical community engagement and helping students think through what ethical relationships mean and how they can function, what are ways of knowing, how do they exist, and all of those kinds of things. CCE 2 and 3 are the writing intensive courses. So writing programs, in case you don't remember, are the programs that are kind of the prerequisites, the courses you have to finish that prepare you for all college writing. They tend to be humanities based, and ours is kind of a blend of humanities and social sciences because of the nature of the work. But 2 and 3 are in development. So 2 ran for the first time last quarter and this quarter, and 3 will run for the first time next quarter. So the faculty that we have continued to hire and the lecturers who work in the program are literally designing the courses week by week as they're running. And there's more to say about that, but I won't. Basically in year 1, we went from 0 staff. I mean, literally 0, like the college was getting approved to run and it had a proposal and an implementation plan and it works. It had been approved at the UCOP level, but the first staff didn't start until February. And so we really literally at 0 at the start of that year, and then we got to 16 by the day before orientation, by the day before students moved in. We had 500 residents that could live in that first building that opened, which was Provost, and the others had to live in other parts of campus because the buildings weren't able to open on time. So we just get 3, 2, 1. So we opened a second building and filled it halfway in the middle of the year. So we ran move-in twice. I know this is kind of the boring details, but this is the infrastructural challenge of trying to run an educational process while people live there. So that's basically for us, it's the beginning of translating the proposal to a reality. How do you go from the idea to actually, what are we actually building here? That story is actually about a history of organizing by students on campus, particularly about 10 years ago. There was, no longer, sorry, 12 years ago, maybe. There's a period in UCSD's history called, a lot of people on campus call it Black Winter. A A lot of other people might refer to it as the Compton Cookout. Maybe you've seen the movie Dear White People. It's one of the incidents that animated that film. And basically, it was a really painful time on campus for a lot of reasons. The Compton Cookout was a party that students hosted where they basically engaged in activities that are akin to blackface and that kind of thing. And there was a noose in the library. There were a number of things that happened. It was actually before I worked at UCSD by a year or two, but I know a number of the people who were there on campus at the time and worked with the students. I know a number of people who now work at the university who were students at the time. And they developed a series of demands that led to the development of our university's DEI course requirement. Because a lot of people say when they do things like that, I didn't know. And so we're at a university and we have the opportunity to provide an education. And so that was one of the things that emerged. Flash forward to 2020 and everything that happened during that time. We had another series of demands from students. And one of the things that students had been asking for a long time was how do we produce an environment that resists anti-Blackness and that is anti-racist. Now, all of our colleges, the entire college system has adopted an anti-racist framework, but our college, 8th College, is the only college that has this explicit commitment as a college to serve those needs and those goals as a part of our theme. So we have the community engaged theme for the educational coursework in the model, and we have this broader mission to respond to the longstanding demands and concerns of communities who've dealt with marginalization in our university for a long time. So beginning to go from that as an idea to what that's going to look like in everything that we do in terms of our community relationships, in terms of our curriculum, in terms of our residential life and programming, is the job of bringing everyone on board. That's the job of hiring, meeting people, finding out how they think about these things. I guarantee you no one has the same definition of any of these things, which makes it somewhat challenging. And a lot of people haven't thought deeply about it. They thought at the surface about their commitments, but haven't really got to a deeper level of, well, what does it mean to resist anti-Blackness? What does it mean to be pro-Black? What is pro-Blackness? What does that mean for everybody and not just, for people who are Black people, right? And so I think who come out of those kinds of traditions, right? And so those questions are questions that are about how do we begin to tell that story? And then we have to lay a lot of groundwork, and that groundwork includes everything from the level of recruiting staff to working with students to building campus community partner relationships to building regional community partnership relationships to building design approaches to building everything. None of those things existed, but colleges existed. So we had a framework for what a college should be, but we didn't have a framework for what this college should be, given that it was trying to undo sort of history of practice. So it's a weird merger, right? A set of systems that we're going to reproduce kind of precisely in the same structure and manner, but a commitment to have that not reproduce these sort of histories of marginalization and oppression, which I think is actually how it usually is done. I think, unfortunately or fortunately, in my view and in my experience, the most likely outcome of our practice is the reproduction of our existing circumstances, which is why I think it's quite important that we have methods that allow us to recognize that and then respond to it, whether it's our positional power or it's just the things that we miss because they're part of the air that we breathe. So I like thinking about methodology a lot for that reason, because I feel like it gives us a foothold. So I don't think we should run scared from that reality, but I think we have our eyes open to it. In year 2, we doubled in size. So after admitting 600 first years in the first year, we admitted another 600 first years in the second year. We opened the rest of the buildings. So we went from 1.5 to 5, which meant for our residential life team, they now serve nearly 2,200 students. We're at 2103 as of last week. So 1,200 of those are our students in 8th College, and the rest are students from all the other colleges around campus who come in with overflow. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but it's a tremendous change to how we function. It also means instead of being on a construction site every day, all the fences are down and everything's open, which is quite lovely, but it has its own built environment challenges. And it still has to become a place, a home, right? So we have buildings, we have landscaping, we we have furniture, but do we have a way of being together is a question, and this is part of our design question. One of the key questions we've had from the start was how we would have community governance in the college. So as a UC, you know that we have what's called shared governance. And shared governance is the way that the faculty maintain control over the academic and intellectual mission of the university. Which means that if we want community input into the academic mission, we have a bit of a challenge because community members are not the people who make decisions about coursework. So how do you have a meaningful community influence in what you're teaching and learning, and yet maintain faculty oversight of the material that you're teaching? And so we built into our bylaws the inclusion of a community advisory board. Now that community advisory board is just trying to come into existence now. So the first step was getting it approved at the Senate level so that it can exist. The next level is bringing the ad hoc committee together that involves faculty, community partners, and everyone, figuring out how do we actually do ethical community work? How do we resource it? How do we make sure that we engage what our actual community partners, not the sort of the community in theory, is interested in from our university, and what kind of mutual relationships we might be able to establish. So that's one of the things that we're in the process of working through now, and it feels a little late as usual because CCE 120, which is the capstone course, it's the practicum course, starts running next year. And I'll add, we have a few students who are actually so full with units that they're going to finish this year. So we don't even offer CCE 120 yet, but they have enough units to graduate. So we're navigating those kinds of questions. And then we're contending with contexts. And I just put an S on it because there's the context of the launch itself and all the challenges that brings all by itself. There's the context of the state budget cut, which was happening no matter what. There's the context of war and violence in the world. There's the context of the federal government and the executive orders, all of which have direct impact on our universities. And it feels like a laser point focus on a college mission like AIF colleges. So all of that is something that is, I'm going to say it wasn't all in my plan when I took the job. But there it is, that's what we're doing. And then we're starting also to really try to notice the developing identities of the college. And I mention this because part of my work is really focused, a major part of my work is focused on practice. And how do we design for practice that is sustaining? And anyone who works in design knows that you can't just design a thing and then people will just do it the way you designed it. Am I right? Am I wrong? Someone has this magical power? No. So the question that I'm often asking is, what makes a practice something we want to keep doing, makes us want to sustain it? But also, what makes it belong to us? And I'll talk about that when I get to my practice in common slide, but that's basically where we are today, is asking these kinds of questions and trying to think through them while everything is happening all at once. Next year, we're going to jump up. Colleges usually bring in about 800 first years per year, but we were new, so they wanted to go easy on us. That's why we had 600. So next year, we're supposed to jump to 800 first years and 400 transfers. But finally, I got a yes. I asked, can we hold off on transfers for just 1 year, just one more year, so we can actually think about them and prepare for them. And that was the suggestion of our team, and we got a yes. And the agreement is we need to take a few more first years to offset that. But they're not going to make us take 400 more first year, so it's maybe 900 next year. So we're going to jump in size quite a bit, and then we're going to launch CCE 120. And then our fourth year, we'll go to 800 first years, 400 transfers, and that's supposed to be heading into steady state. And we'll, like, I don't know, plan a graduation or something and all those good things. So that's an overview of our college, what we're trying to do, and like a number of the factors that go into sort of my thinking about what my job is and what I'm trying to do as provost, which one of my colleagues has described as kind of like being the mayor of a small town. I'll tell you in a few years if I think that's an accurate description, but right now it's the best that I have. Any questions about the college system that are confusing at this point? Okay. The rest of this is going to go a little bit faster, I think, but for me, this is kind of the exciting stuff that kind of pushed me toward doing this job to begin with. So in brief, this is not a great visual, so just bear with me, but it just helps me talk through it. So I started out talking about this question of scale. And in 2019, I was at the cyber learning meeting for NSF, and I was thinking about my own learning as a graduate student and all those years where we were working in what was called the Life Center, and the way people think about how you create innovations, and then you implement them, and then you scale them in a mass way. Right? This is the rollout of AI, right? It's like at some point it was a small funded project, and eventually now we have, Trident GPT and every permutation of that model, of that language learning model around our systems. So I was asking, when we do this, it seems to me a relationship reliably gets crushed. And people are often unhappy with these mass scaling experiences. Anybody who's had an experience with Common Core from the design side versus Common Core from the parent with kids and worksheets side would attest to this. This is a challenge, getting from good ideas to good mass execution. And so I was starting to ask, why can't relationships scale? But not with a sort of naive, oh, why can't relationships scale, but more, what is the nature of scale when we think about relationship? Because in fact, relationships, at least some aspects of them in some contexts, do scale pretty well. And we see people who are members of organizations who then relate to one another across large, vast distances, differences in culture, etc. So how does that happen, right? How can you be a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority in Tennessee and then have and feel a connection with someone living in Ghana, right? Like how does that occur? This is one of the kinds of questions that I was asking. And so I started to just try to think about what relational scale might look like. What does it look like between small groups of people, peer-to-peer, student to advisor, community member to student, etc.? What does it look like within a local community of practice? So how does relationship work when you form a set of practices that you care about and that you want to advance? How do you think across organizational roles and positions, right? So we have all these organizational roles we've inherited, for instance, in the college system. We have student council, we have advisory boards, we have, all of these units that I've described, and all these places on campus, these centers. How do they all relate to one another? Because that's actually how the units talk to each other. There are people within units that make things happen. And then through institutional tensions. And so I can't think of a more obvious time to think about those than right now, whether it's the university system to the state or the federal government, or it's the public library. We were talking about this last night at dinner, or operating in a building where it's managed on one floor by academic affairs and the registrar, and on another floor by housing, dining, and hospitality, and on another floor by real estate, all of whom have competing missions, goals, priorities, right? But we're all sharing the same space and managing it sort of together. So these are questions that I think are at the crux of trying to do something like an 8th college design. For years and years and years, I have done community partner work, and they all begin in relationship between the people who agree to do the work. And they can sustain for a really long time. My community partner is at UC Lynx right now, up in Berkeley, where I would have been if not for this wonderful opportunity and my daughter's show this evening. And that work extends over years. That relationship extends with other scholars, right? Those relationships can be really longitudinal, and it's a time over time, it's a kind of scale. I've worked in larger scale projects that might involve a whole school district, right? We think a lot about RPPs, research practice partnerships, and how can we sort of exist together in those ways. But trying to think about what happens when you scale from, say, person to group, person to institution. I just had a conversation at lunch, and just briefly, we had that conversation about what is it, what is the institution kind of doing to us, right? The scale of power relation is so vast that that's a problem that we have to consider. And so that's a question I'm asking when asked to build something like 8th college, because that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to kind of ask the community to sustain these massive numbers of people moving through relationship with one another, and imagining that that's going to be great for everybody. And I think we know that without some serious effort, it won't be great for everybody, which is a great concern to me. A second key idea that I'm thinking with that comes from this notion of relational scale is, what tools do I have as a scholar of design to think about this? And, I spent a lot of time, my whole sort of graduate study, learning principles of design. Iterative design and user-centered design were the places that we started. Certainly human-computer interaction was a part of that work. I'm going to, the conferences that let us think through those things together. Ethnographic and participant observation actually is a sort of entry into thinking about design. Participatory action research, youth participatory action research, also known as YPAR. These thinkers like Bilal and Freire and Cameron and Fine and all of these folks who are thinking through these ideas, shaping my thinking about design. Chris Gutierrez and social design experience, and Susan Giroux. University community partnerships with Mike Cole and Olga Vasquez. Participatory design research with Megan Bang and Chidi Bosudi, who are like close collaborators with me and partners. Ontological design by Escobar, like all of these different sort of histories of design. And I was asking, how can I sort of imagine in a way that I could hold what my design principles would need to be in order to achieve something that feels like free movement and just relations and ethical relations. And I was working on a project with a colleague called Listening to Waves. Victor Mitsas, who's a cognitive research scientist at UCSD. And he's got this project where he's trying to teach students about waves. And he starts with music because he's an artist and musician. And he'll hand students a pipe, and well, two pipes really. And I'll say, here, hold this. And he'll hold the pipe, he'll hit it, and it will ring. I wish I had a pipe with me. Sorry, I can't do it. And then he'll hand it to the students. He won't say a word. And then the students hit it, and it goes thunk, thunk, thunk. Everyone laughs. They hand it to somebody else. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It goes around the room. He takes it back. He holds it. Bing. It's a beautiful ring. And gradually, eventually, someone figures out he's holding it in a particular place, and they remember the xylophone or whatever it is, and then they start to get it, right? And then this beautiful tone fills the room. And so Victor was really excited about this. I'd seen him do it a few different times. And then I had a meeting with him, and he started to describe the node and the antinode to me. And so I'm just going to describe as best I can, but please forgive me, I'm not a physicist. Here I use nodal design, or nodal as a metaphor referring to the location, node, and antinode on a material such as a xylophone, metal pipe, or windell, where wave vibration has minimal amplitude, allowing a resonant tone. So in that sense, what's happening is if you hold it in just the right place, the wave has the greatest freedom of movement and it can keep going. It's like a guitar. I'm a guitarist, so I love this idea. And I thought, what a beautiful metaphor for human-centered design, right? If that's the way we want to build structure, right? We want to be able to hold something real. A guitar is a perfect example. You kind of do one thing with a guitar, and yet you can do infinite things with a guitar. That's kind of where I'm going. So I believe that like structured support is really important in a design process that allows practice to stick, that allows practice to sustain. I'm also concerned with historic power relations and hegemony and all those kinds of things. So I'm very interested in how we can design in ways that challenge and keep us from reproducing these different kinds of ideas without imposing what it should look like on people. People have creative freedom, they have different ways of being and living in the world, and I think that's a good thing. So how does design allow for that while providing that structured support? So identify two challenges. One I would say is to design for practice that can be adopted, sustained, modified, structured, and supported as necessary. Sorry for the typo there. And then the other is, how do you form participatory design practices in complex, relational, and highly pressured conditions? So this idea of nodal design is great. And then, to me, it's great. I just think it's beautiful. But then when I actually try to do it, I realize, okay, but I'm facing this onslaught of practical challenges. And, actually, literally, more than 1,000 people trying to participate in this process right now today already. Because our students have something to say about what we're doing, and our faculty have something to say about what we're doing, and our staff have something to say about what we're doing, and I have something to say about what we're doing. And that's the nature of collective practice. And so how do we actually support people's engagement in design in ways that lead to these kinds of outcomes is my sort of design question. I'm trying to bring what I've learned over a career to this project, and I'm not sure if I'm succeeding, but trying really hard. This other concern that I have about designing for participation comes out of my training in situated practices and situated learning. And I'll just try to describe it for anyone who's not an LPP person. Is anybody not an LPP person? I feel like it's likely, but maybe. Okay, we'll go for it. So legitimate peripheral participation is a premise, bear with me here, that learning is a participatory trajectory, essentially. And in order to begin learning to do something, you start at the edges, you start on the periphery. I was in Kylie's lab yesterday and looking at all these weaving looms. I'm like, I recognize those, very peripheral. Don't know how to weave at all, but I know that's a loom. Oh, and then that's a loom you can program, and oh, look at these beautiful things. I'm like, at this moment, getting a little excited, and Kylie's like expertly walking me through this. I'm very peripheral, right, in that moment. But I have the potential to begin participating through my interest and the little bit of knowledge that I have. But I'm not a member of a weaving community in any sense yet, and I have no weaving practice. Well, I mean, I make pot holders. Okay, think about that. So here's the thing. When I went to graduate school and continued to study, I noticed that people start to identify as sort of situated practices people, LPP people. It becomes like an identity. It's like this very positive orientation to learning for people who want to challenge, for instance, a behavioral notion of learning, right? A Pavlov's dog kind of model of learning, conditioning kind of model of learning, understanding how we become to be full participants in a community. The thing is, there's a paragraph in this text that mentions, by the way, there is a version of legitimate peripheral participation whereby you are held at the margin legitimately. So as opposed to being recognized as a legitimate participant, even though you're not actively doing the things. Think of children in your household, for instance, who maybe aren't helping, right? I put that in quotes to say that maybe they're not helping you that much. They might even be hindering you a little bit, but they're legitimately members of the participatory practice of making dinner or doing the dishes or folding the laundry, even though they're not expert in it, or you can't leave them to do it on their own. So they're beginning to participate at the periphery of the activity. But there are conditions under which we maintain that peripheral position legitimately. I would argue that some of what's going on with executive orders in this moment is about producing a legitimate peripheral position for ways of knowing, ways of thinking, ways of being. Saying, legitimately, this is okay. You should stay at this edge. You should stay at this point of erasure. So one of the things that I'm interested in is discovering whether or not we know in any given community the form of peripheral participation that is at work. Because one of the challenges for young people, which is where I've been beginning my work, is beginning to recognize that they are legitimately being held at the margin for the entirety of their participation. They're not actually meant to become full participants in the activity. But it doesn't always begin with that awareness. You can begin joining a community, begin trying to participate, and gradually become aware that you're in fact not headed toward full participation, or you're tokenized, etc. And that changes the nature of what your practice might be if you choose to persist in that community. So this is something that I have great concern about, and I think it's a direct concern for the launch of 8th College, because there's a long history of community relations between UC San Diego as an institution and the surrounding regions and communities for which we intend to partner, but often have poor relationships. Now, the one-to-one relationships between UCSD faculty, staff, or students and community partners can be beautiful, but the institutional relationship is often quite fraught, and there's a lot of repair that's needed. And the institution often, this is me speaking without data here, it's just a sort of an experiential feeling. that the institution perceives itself to be, narrates itself to be the kind of community member or partner that allows for full participation, or fuller participation to emerge in a relationship. But many of our partners perceive that to be actually a perpetually marginal relationship. So that's why I raised that particular conceptual concern here, because I think that's a part of the design question that I'm trying to answer. I promise I'm almost done. Oh, I screwed up this slide. Sorry, it's the wrong one. What this is meant to convey is going back to this question of practice in common. So one of the things that I was talking about earlier was that I think practice is not easy to design. But when we get it right, people come to sort of own the practice. And the best example I have of this right now is, because I'm an athlete, is with sports. So I don't actually play soccer, aka football, but I love to watch it. And I have lots of friends, family, kids, etc. who play. I will stay up late at night and watch a World Cup game at 2 a.m. So I really think about the range of things that happen with this as a sport. And so one of the things that I would argue is that soccer is a practice that belongs to people around the world. It doesn't belong to FIFA, the professional organization that runs and makes lots of money off of things like the World Cup. And the reason I say it belongs to people is because they figure out how to play it everywhere. They figure out how to build infrastructure for it. They figure out how to build leagues for it. They figure out how to make it happen. In addition, people also have an experience when they play of understanding what it is to be excellent at that sport. So I may not be Ronaldo, but because I'm not Ronaldo and I play, I go, wow, look what he can do. Oh my goodness, this is amazing, right? Or Naomi Girma, or whoever it is your favorite soccer player that you want to follow. If you play, you recognize what's excellent in what people do, because the practice is something you're a part of. I would argue that in my thinking and my work about the design of democratic environments, that we actually don't always understand the difference between, say, novice democratic practice and expert democratic practice. So as an everyday life activity, for instance, what do we know about what it is to be good at being a professional politician? What parts of our lives allow us to recognize and participate in that practice? My sense is a lot of our access to those kinds of participation are either filtered through environments that are not so democratically structured and a little more authoritatively structured, a little more hierarchically structured. But also that the kinds of practice in democratic organizations, et cetera, that we engage are not the same practices that the professionals are engaging. So there's a disconnect. So this kind of question to me relates to how we might think about what it is to bring communities together with students or faculty, et cetera, who might be operating in different spheres of practice. How do we design something that is shared enough that we can both sustain the practice, and then we can also recognize what excellent practice looks like, so we can actually provide an excellent education. That's sort of like the big picture conceptually of what I'm asking. Sorry about that slide. That was the last one. So what it comes down to then is, for me, how do you study this? I've never really tried to study something at this scale, and maybe it's a bad idea. Maybe I just need to pick a really small nugget of this and say, just study this part, study that little part. And it's a whole research agenda, which I'm sure it is. But I'm still young enough to go after it, right? And I think there are a number of people who might want to join in that process. So the first model that I thought of, worked with one of my doctoral students around, was, okay, when we build this college, just to be clear, this is before anybody works for us, before I have any faculty, students, buildings, anything. And I thought, okay, well, there's a strike going on, and the strike, maybe you remember it, was really, again, shedding light on the strain of graduate life, graduate education, and how do graduate students sustain themselves and do their work and afford to live in the cities where they're working and all those things. And as a university system, we know that we have a problem here, but we don't have a good solution. And so here we are, the strike. Well, one of the challenges is that for students, for instance, in the social sciences, is they often are funded through their TAships, And they're not getting as much access to research training. So one of our ideas was, what if the TAs who teach in our program have a kind of joint appointment where half their time is for teaching and half their time is for graduate research training in community engaged work that we're teaching in classes. And then we would be able to gather data as we're designing classes and prototyping the classes. Thank you. That was the first model. But then we hired faculty, and faculty have a mind of their own, as you may have noticed. And I love that. I really love our faculty. And they said, we want to design the courses a little differently than they're existing in the plan. And the TA portion of our training that was in our first course changed. And so we don't have TAs at CCE 1, and we won't really have TAs until we get to CCE 120. So that model is a bit on hold because that model didn't materialize. But it could still, because we will have TAs. There are some challenges there. A second design model would be a more participatory design research model where we launch a co-curricular community lab space. This is an idea that's been brought to us both by faculty and students who want to do graduate student training. We have similar course structures for students across the campus. So there was a proposal to build an honors program in 8th College that basically brings together graduate students from public health and urban studies and planning and mechanical engineering together with students and undergraduates in 8th College, working collectively on community engaged project work together as the honors activity. And then to make that activity open and available to our community partners and all of our students, we would function like a community lab that invites people in to raise questions, kind of like a clinic lab model. We got a little bit far down that path. We we're going to go for some research grant money on that, and then we realized, our bandwidth is not quite there yet. So that's sitting on the table as a possible design. A third model is a residential education co-curricular model that leans into the placemaking aspects of 8th College. So we have our curriculum, our 4 courses, all of our students go through that. But at any given time, we'll probably have 1,600 8th College students living in the buildings. And so there's a lot of programming that goes on with that. There is also, we have community partners who we've already partnered with to share space, who've wanted a place where they could host a conference or bring community partners from the binational region in. We're very close to the water, so being able to offer that kind of space in a way that is an in-kind donation is something that we've also been working on and trying to do. So how do we make more of our spaces these kind of co-curricular community pop-up spaces where relationship can begin to emerge outside of the classroom? It's another area where we can study. So that's a third of 3 potential ideas for studying. In the meantime, it's all happening, and I feel like it's passing us by. And so I am hoping that in hearing all of this, your sort of brilliant design thinking hearts and minds might have some suggestions about how to approach the study of this program while it's happening, because I just don't think we get opportunities like this very often. I appreciate your time. I'm sorry I went a little bit long, but I'm finished. Thank you for the opportunity. Questions, comments, concerns, pushback, irritation? Toby and maybe?
Yeah, I guess my question is, this all seems super cool. It is like someone who wants to go down the teaching path. It's like, oh, this is cool. This exists. I guess, in what ways do you see the students who are involved in these different, working with the community specifically, being able to create those kinds of more sustainable relationships, as they're only there for 4, but sometimes 3 years, and how that could branch out with other organizations or passing it on to other students?
Yeah, that's a great and fundamental question. I'll try to give a short answer to it. So I have a long history of teaching a practical course. We teach it every quarter with the partner that I mentioned who's in Berkeley right now. And so we kind of have an idea of what we can do in 10 weeks. That project happens at a learning center in Southeast San Diego that's situated inside a housing complex, a subsidized housing complex. And, we've been running that for over a decade. And students typically, unless they're returning to take the class again, come in with a very little experience in any of the things that we're doing in that environment. And they often come in with some assumptions about who the people are, who the kids are, and who the experts are. And then when they arrive there, they realize that, oh, okay, these kids have a lot more expertise, first of all, in this whole course because they participate in it all the time. And the parents and the elders really have a deeper level of engagement and connection with the course in many ways than the students. So that quick recognition sort of amplifies the need for the students to build relationship and understand how to be in relation and sort of share mutual understanding together and figure out what people want to do. With a 4-course series where you have potentially 4 years with students to sort of build an understanding and then build relationships in community, our hope is that both there's more mutual leadership and guidance from our community partners about what they'd like to see, and more of a pipeline of time for students to get to know people and listen. And so we get past that learning that goes, oh, wow, members of the community have these brilliant ways of knowing that I wasn't aware of as a learning outcome. And that we get closer to understanding what members of our various community partner worlds would actually like to see, which the second answer is varies wildly. So we have partners who have told us, this is a great idea if you're actually producing a kind of education where students can come to us skilled in the ways of working together that we care about. We could be very interested because it would really help us have more people working with us on these projects on the ground. But we don't have time for people who either don't know what they're doing or are going to be, problematic in some way or harmful because they don't understand these traditions or ways of working. We have other people who say, we want the green people, like we want to be a part of how these students come to know how to be in relation to the work world and sort of everything in between. And so in that sense, I think we're still asking the question because there's such a variety of ways that we could be connected. Does that begin to answer your question?
Yeah, I think I'm curious on how the undergraduates kind of pass it on to each other.
Mhm.
So if it's like a long period of time working with like one community partner of ours, especially when students are in like a residential situation, kind of on top of each other all the time, of how they can build that kind of community of ongoing knowledge and
In the research I do at TCLC, we have what we call the undergrads are called buddies by the kids, and the super buddies are people who come back repeatedly, and they do precisely that because they can take the course more than once. In design for a college, one of the hopes that the faculty have is that we will have students who become essentially undergraduate instructional assistants who are part of that mentorship. But we already see that happening with our undergraduate council and our student council and our programming board who try to live the values of the curriculum in the way that they do things in the college. So when you go from year 1 where you have no upperclassmen and nobody to look to, and then you go to year 2, you can already see that the upperclassmen are, the sophomores are able to share information and guidance, and they do with first-year students. So we're seeing the possibility of those kinds of relationships. We don't have the community infrastructure and relationships in place yet to really address that question. What we have are, ideas and visions for how it might happen.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking along the same, or curious about the same sorts of things, and specifically like your nested circles, like what is the relationship between, community engagement being the community outside of campus, and then the community of the college, the community of the
Of the
campus
campus,
itself,
yeah.
and it's like community all the way down. And as
Yeah.
somebody who is always curious about young people's affinity groups and the kind of mentorship, and like how can you get the experiential learning around community contribution to work not only with the external community, but internally in the college? It seems like a really unique opportunity to be able to do that. And I don't know how to do it, but I'll throw out some some idea or just some other examples, I guess. So Andy Van Dam has done something really interesting at Brown around undergraduate CS education. I don't know. Do you know his model?
I don't.
So I only know it because my daughter went through it, but basically the undergrads teach all of the undergraduate, at least the sort of foundational courses and even some of the graduate courses. And he has a very structured kind of process for training and recruiting TAs that are all run by the undergrads. So once you take the first year CS program, you're eligible to apply to become a TA, and then they all come and they're all like trained and recruited by the other undergraduates, but they all come a week before school starts for TA camp. And it's a very structured program, but it's a way of kind of scaling that educational opportunity, but also, you know, of course, it's an amazing experience for the undergrad. So there's some interesting models where, you know, this kind of passing it down, if you have that kind of flexibility within your curriculum, which I don't know if you do. And then the other is just like more on kind of the data collection question. And you have such a strong background in PAR and other, you know, youth-driven research. And I wanted to hear, I wish we had another dinner tonight to talk through more of this, but like just how media and Imagine community and online affinity groups can play into it, and whether there's just an opportunity to have a participatory approach to gathering student experience, given that the constraints you're under, it's very difficult to run like maybe a formal project or be you yourself being conducting research while also leading this, you know, building the plane while you fly it kind of scenario. But if you could invite sort of open feedback or, you know, online communities or some sort of non-exploitative data capture of what young people's experiences are, given that these are probably fairly active participatory type students. And I don't have a model, but I just feel like it'd be fun to explore something.
Those are great questions. And great ideas. I'm writing all the notes of yours, and yours, you have something to add to that. I realize it's 3:06, but
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I do have to run, but thank you so much.
Thanks,
Yeah.
My undergrad does that kind of thing. I went to a small liberal arts college, so it's this thing of same-ish space, but there's mentored advanced projects that were like build your own course that you would do kind of with a professor, but sometimes it would be like, here's like do a data connection thing of like how folk are doing all these different things.
Yeah. We had a similar experience at my undergrad as well, with some of our programs. Human biology was like that, and there were a couple others that were like that model. I think it's a little tricky in the UC right now because we have some rules about who can do what in relation to you know, our union obligations and responsibilities. But I think, you know, there's room there. And I love that question Mimi's asking about media Imagine community. So I will take a look at what possibilities we have in both cases. So
Yeah, we can wrap up and continue the conversation outside.
wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone.
Chill for a bit. I like chatting with people.
Yeah.
It's Friday afternoon. Not a problem. Yeah.
So, Lily Ronnie is here from also from UC San Diego. I think she's at some other thing on campus.
Yeah,
She's
that's
gonna
fair.
come and meet me here. She's making over for dinner. So I'll meet her here in this running second.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
like,
well
I don't know
educated.
this.
Estoy viendo que, por ejemplo, el colegio
Through those levels.
Human-centered design.
Wow, I think I've got the
Also, I
same.
had to look at física.
Hi, guys.
Hi, yeah, you too. It's been a while. Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I saw you too. You've been doing good. You've been, like getting out there.
I'm doing a race in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that.
What kind of rig?
It's through Morrow Canyon, so down in Laguna, like by